Hey guys, it's Sam. Welcome back to Vlogmas. Today we're going to be doing my overall series wrap-up for 2023. Because series is a fairly big part of my reading, although we'll get the actual stats of all my reading for this year in the new year. As you guys know, I tend to do all of my wrap-up stuff for the most part in the new year, although this year I'm doing a little bit more at the end of the year. Surprising, I know. But overall, a lot of my reading does tend to revolve around series since I read a lot of speculative, sci-fi, fantasy, that kind of thing. So I'm gonna be talking about all the series that I finished this year, started and will continue, started and DNF'd, and the series that I continued with, maybe caught up with, things like that. I ended up finishing 6 series, which is not as many as I had planned. Like last year, I think I did 11 or 12 series, and that will be something that I think I might focus on again in 2024. But again, we'll get to that later. But I'm still happy with what I did finish. So first I finished the Foundry Side series by Robert Jackson Bennett. This I finished at the beginning of the year. The final book came out, I finished that, and it was one of my first reads of the year, and I really enjoyed this series. I really enjoy Robert Jackson Bennett's work. I still have not continued with his other series that wasn't this, the City series or something, but this is great and I plan on continuing to read his other series that come out. He has something coming out in 2024 as well. I also finished up The Last Hours by Cassandra Clare. This is the final book in the Last Hours series, and this is part of her Shadowhunters world, and I have read some of the more historical Shadowhunter stuff, so I've read this and I've read The Infernal Devices basically. And after this I'm I'm done with Cassandra Clare. It's fine. This finale was just fine. So long. All of her books are way too long, this one especially. So much didn't happen. I read the series and I've read both of these series of hers because of just the relationships and stuff. This was a lot of sameness. There were 6 different relationships that you follow. Most of them hinge on miscommunication plots and a lot of the same angstiness kind of, which is fine, but at a certain point it's just no more. So yeah, I am done with Shadowhunters. I will not read any more Shadowhunters. There are other things that interest me, but I am happy to have finished out this sort of historical piece of Shadowhunters timeline, I guess. Then I finished out The Bonecryer's Moon by Catherine Purdy. I reread the first book and then got to the second one, and I quite enjoyed this little series. This is a little duology that has bone magic and moon magic and ushering the dead and soulmates and friends stuff. I don't know, I liked this series. A very solid YA series, the covers are stunning, and yeah, it was a fun time. I think, did I listen to the second one on audio? I might have listened to the second one on audio, but overall really enjoyed these and will kind of be keeping my eye out a little bit for more of her work. I do tend to like finding YA authors that are not super popular, mid-list authors that do just kind of fun stuff like this. So yeah, I quite enjoyed this series. So if you're into just witchiness, bone magic stuff, any of those things, any of those sort of keywords that I just mentioned, I would recommend this series. Then I finished up the Scholomance series by Naomi Novik. So I read the second and third book. I'm pretty sure I read the second and third. Yes. Anyway, I also quite enjoyed this series, but I enjoyed Naomi Novik's work anyway. I do feel like each book had a distinctly different feel in some ways, but I found the last book very satisfying, and I found the characters to be really interesting, and I found that as the series went on, the character work did also get better, because it is a very world-building heavy series. So if you don't enjoy the idea of a very dark, magical world in which monsters are constantly trying to eat anyone that can do magic, and there being a scary school that is really bad for the kids, but also better than being out in the real world, yikes. If that doesn't appeal to you and learning about that doesn't appeal to you, you probably won't like this series. But I enjoyed that world, and then the grumpy sunshine dynamic of the 2 main characters as well. And our main character, being someone who at first seems so closed off from the world, but is ultimately very soft and cares about people and stuff. So overall, really liked the series. I also read the Book of Tea series. This was another little YA series that was just very easy. I had the first book on my shelf and I listened to the second one on audio. I find it very forgettable. It's a series that, again, sort of based on tea magic, and the first book is much more about the tea magic stuff. The second book is much more questy, and just kind of washes over you a little bit. So I enjoyed the tea magic elements and stuff, but just a 3-star series. Nothing is sticking out of my head as being particularly bad or anything about it, but nothing is really standing. I couldn't tell you the characters' names. I can tell you like briefly about some of the plot points, but it was just so like basic and just fine that yeah, feel very neutral about it. And lastly is technically a series that I haven't finished but will, because I'm going to read this book next, and so I'm going to include this for my 2023 reading. That is the Monk and the Robot series. I'm not sure if this is more than just the two, if more are going to come out, so I'm calling this a finished series, that it's just a duology. But I really loved the first book in the series. I'm going to be reading this next in my list. It's a novella. I'm going to read it, and I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it. This is by Becky Chambers. So yeah, this is one of the things that I wanted to finish before the end of the year. Then we have series that I started this year and will continue. I actually ended up starting a lot of series this year, which, oops. I have 9 series that I did that with. So first is The Adventures of Amina El-Sarafi. I really loved this first installment in this series as like a pirate fantasy series with some like political stuff going on. So the next book I think is supposed to come out possibly next year or the year after. Whatever. Whenever the next book comes out, I will be continuing with the series. I really enjoyed it. We have Belladonna, or like whatever. Actually, I don't know if there's a different series name for this, but first book is Belladonna. This is a YA series, a YA duology about a main character who has this like connection to death, is immune to poisons, all of that, and like has this connection to death as like a personified being, which is very cool. So I really enjoyed this, and the last like part of this, the little cliffhanger for this, was pretty interesting. So I'm going to continue with this little duology. Again, in that same vein that I talked about earlier of like solid mid-list YA. Like, is something that intrigues me slightly more. Like, I'm not reading a ton of YA these days, but stuff like this can kind of slip through the cracks and get to me. So I'll be continuing with this. The next book is already out, just like I think came out in the fall. So I'm going to be finishing this next year, hopefully. And we have the Queens of Renthea series by Sarah Beth Durst. I read this first book this year, and this has like nature magic and some like political things as well. I thought that these were all companion books. There's 3 books in this series, but I actually think they do follow all of the same character generally throughout her life and like some of the things that are going on politically. But this is so funny because I had gotten the 3rd book in this series like years ago and just kept it and being like, yeah, I want to read it, but I need to read the first 2 books. So I've now read the first one. I'm going to read the second one. It's a whole finished series now, but solid, like, again, midlist adult fantasy. And we have the Wilderwood duology by Hannah Witten. I really enjoyed For the Wolf that I read last month or the month before that. I'm forgetting exactly. But I read this very recently, and this speaks to me because it's all of this like nature magic and corrupted forests and people who are personifications of things in the woods and whatever. The second book is more of like it's not a companion, I think it's still a continuation, but it mostly follows the sister of the girl in this one, who had chapters in this one, so I feel like it'll kind of be a flip-flop. But I am wanting to continue with this series for sure. It definitely speaks to me, very dark, very twisty. I enjoy that. Then we have the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend. This is one that I'm not like in any kind of rush to continue, but this is the middle grade series that I found very delightful. We read the first book for House Salt Book Club this year, and all of us really enjoyed it. Like, if I'm ever feeling like I want a little bit of whimsy, a little bit of that, like, again, middle grade feel, kind of Tim Burton eccentric adjacent-esque creepy kid stuff, yeah. This is super cute. I can see myself getting these like from the library moving forward. We have The Midnight Lie by Marie Rutkowski. I'm not sure what the name of this series is, but this is another duology. This is one that I read at the beginning of this year, and so some of the details of this are like slightly foggy, but this is in the same world as the Winners trilogy, which is one of my favorites. This is later on in the timeline. This is more queer, and there's like things that this introduced. This is a book that I initially like tried to read a few years ago and like couldn't get into, and then read, really enjoyed, and then have like, again, forgotten like elements of it, but not enough to be like, well, I'm gonna DNF the series. It's like, no, like I'm intrigued by this. So again, another YA series that is intriguing to me that I will be continuing with as soon as I can get my hands on this. Probably, again, library read. Then I will be continuing with the Singing Hill cycle by Niveau. These are a series of novellas that I caught up with for the Hugos this year because one was nominated for the Hugos. The next one is coming out soon-ish, but this is following a cleric who basically catalogs stories and goes around and talks to people. And generally the narrative goes like they are communicating what the story that they know is, and then someone else is telling them like what the truth is, and like this idea of like who makes stories and who makes history and all this stuff is generally how these are composed. So I really enjoy the dynamics of that, and I find these very fun little novellas. So I'll be continuing with this series as well. Then a few series that I just got to and started at the end of this year, literally this month. So I'll be continuing with the Divide series by J.S. Dews. This is a sci-fi series where people are sort of stationed at the edge of the universe, and then something starts happening with the edge of the universe and like chaos ensues. Has like a slightly Mass Effect type feel to it, in my opinion, and this is at least a duology, if not going to be a trilogy. 2 books are out. I'm not sure if a 3rd one's supposed to be out, but I found this very fun, action-packed adult sci-fi, so I'll be continuing with this. And lastly, we have The Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, so The Live Ship Traders. I read this first book this month, or finished it at least this month, and we'll be continuing with the series and with The Realm of the Elderlings, but probably in 2024, I will at least just finish this series, fingers crossed. And then I ended up DNFing 6 series this year. A couple of these I talked about in my worst books of 2023 video, so I will link that on the screen for more information. But first is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I will not be continuing with this series. It was amazing that I even started it in the first place, but I got curious. This was incredibly mediocre. I'm not hearing good things even from fans about the series as it continues, and 5 books of that, no. I will not be doing that. I also started the Serpent and Dove series by Shelby Marin, and I had every intention to continue with the series, but time has gone on and I'm just not going to, and I'll talk about that. I'm going to be wrapping up my read or DNF vlog. Yes, the thing that I started this time last year. Yeah, we'll get to that. But I'll be talking about that more in that video. But I read the first book and it was decent. I didn't hate it. I think I gave it maybe 3, maybe 4. I think it was a 3.5 or something. I enjoyed a lot of elements of it, but not enough to really continue with the series. A lot of people say it goes downhill anyway, and it's been almost a year and I haven't continued, so I'm just gonna leave this one. Then you've probably gotten sick of hearing the saga of the Vampire Academy, but I will be not continuing with this series. I DNF'd this. I read the first book to give it a chance, also because we read it for the Household Book Club again, and then people were like, oh, it gets better, keep going, and I tried to read the second book and it's not better, and I will not be continuing. I know a lot of people are very nostalgic about it. Again, I talk about this more in my worst books of the year video if you want more information, but not for me. It's very of its time, and that time has passed. Then The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. This I had high hopes for, and it was just fine. I ended up listening to this on audio, and there were parts of it that I found a little confusing in a weird way as far as the world building stuff and the timeline, and I just found myself not super caring to continue. It has some interesting ideas about gods and godhood and stuff that I tend to really enjoy, but not enough to grip me and keep me in the world and interested in it. It also follows orcs and stuff, which I think is very cool, and orcs as an established society, not just a barbarian race and all the things that, the orc trope does. But yeah, I don't really care enough to continue with this series. Another one I talked about in my worst books of the year, The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. This was bad. I DNF'd this first book. Most of these at least got through the first book. All of these other ones. This one I did not. So this was not a fun time for me. This was not what I wanted out of the series, even though there was a ton of things that could have been really good for me in this series as far as just tropes and stuff used and atmosphere and all of that. But no. This was bad, and I will not be continuing. And lastly is the Southern Reach series by Jeff Vandermeer. This is a sci-fi series. The first book is Annihilation, which I did end up reading, but what I wanted out of Annihilation is more about what the movie is like, even though I haven't even watched the movie, but I know things about the movie. This was a lot more, I don't know, less happens. A lot of nothing happens. And it was just very boring to me. So I tried to continue with the next book in the series, and just a continuation of that. It was just give me the meat of this atmosphere and this place that is creepy and changing people's biology and whatever. And it didn't really have any of that. And I was bored. So I ended up DNFing the series. And then lastly, I did continue on with 7 other series, and not caught up with necessarily. There's nothing that I there's a few things that I did catch up with, but generally speaking, this wasn't a catching up with year in the way that I hoped that it would be, but I did continue with some series that I'd already started. So first we have the Wayward Children series by Shauna McGuire. I continued with this, and I actually will end up reading 2 installments in this, because another one I'm going to be reading again before the end of the year, but I continued on with this and have this. That's technically caught up, or maybe one more is out, so I cannot keep track of how quickly these come out, but I am nearly caught up with this now. I also continued with the Monstrous series by Sana Takeda and Marjorie Liu, so one of my favorite graphic novel series. I have a lot of graphic novel series currently ongoing that I need to catch up with, and this I'm nearly caught up. I have volume 7, which I might get to before the end of the year. We'll see. And I think that I'm caught up with everything that is out. Maybe volume 8 is out now. Again, I don't necessarily keep up with all of this stuff, but I am very nearly caught up with these then. I did continue on with the Chilling Effect series by Valerie Valdez, so I read the 2nd book. I want to get to the 3rd book that is a completed series. This is very Mass Effect feeling to me. So a sci-fi series that I really enjoy and that I will be continuing with as well. I'm counting this as continued even though it's technically not a continuation, it's more like a reread in order to continue, but I'm really making an effort with the Expanse series. So I reread the first 2 books. I'm currently about to get the 3rd book on audio from my library. So I've been rereading this on audio, which is great. But I have the 4th and 5th book on my TBR. Again, we'll get to the TBR stuff later on in the year. But I wanted to continue with this series and start catching up on it. It's now a completed series. So I did do some work on these this year. Then I continued on with the Atlas 6 series. I read the Atlas Paradox, and this is like enjoyable and interesting with some of the stuff that it's doing. So although not a lot of people have talked about this next book as much as like the first book got talked about, like everyone was talking about the Atlas 6, I'm still going to continue with this series. It's a bunch of like unlikable protagonists, very like dark academia-esque, but I'm enjoying it enough to continue with it. I also continued with the Burning Kingdom series, and I did catch up with this because these are all of them that are out. So I did finish the Oleander Sword, and that is the 2nd book in the series that is currently out. The 3rd book is going to come out sometime soon, not even announced yet, but that will be the final book in the series. I am caught up with this. I will continue. I love Tasha Suri. She's perfect. And finally, I did continue with the Kate Daniels series. I think I'm on, shoot, I didn't check this before I started filming. I think I read the 3rd or 4th book, 4th book. I read the book where there's more romancy stuff happening, and then some of the characters that have been slow burning build up have finally like gotten together. So yeah, maybe it's 4 or 5, maybe. I don't know, but I've been enjoying those. It's tragic that I couldn't get to those more this year, actually. I just, ran out of time and stuff, but I really enjoy that series, and I read those the beginning of the year. I think it was like February or March. So hopefully I can get to more of those in 2024, because I do really enjoy the Kate Daniels series. Whew, this is a very long video. Okay, that is it for my series wrap up. I will be talking slightly more about series going forward. I have a series tag that Mara from Books Like Whoa does that I'm going to be doing coming up soon, and then talking about like some of these series and how I want to continue them in the new year. So more stuff about series, but comment down below, let me know how your series reading went this year, and if you enjoy me like talking about sort of series wrapping up in this way. But yeah, thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.